Good evening, everyone. I'm Thane Rosenbaum. I'm the creative director of a forum on life, culture, and society at Touro University. And welcome to the Folks Conversation series. Tonight, our special guest, the wondrous Sage Steele. Where is she? We're going to pull her up in a second. There she is. Sage
Hi.
Steele. No, there she is. Wave to the audience, Sage.
Hey,
We
Thane. Hi, guys and gals everywhere.
Hey, Sage. Thanks for joining us on this conversation series. You all know Sage from her 16 years as the anchor for ESPN's flagship show, Sportscenter. She also hosted her own show for both uh, ESPN and ABC, I believe, what was called NBA Countdown. She's a hoop specialist, as you know. She's had a long run as a hostess for cool shows like Dick Clark's Rocking New Year's Eve. I think she once or maybe twice was the hostess for the Miss America pageant
Yes.
and even the Rose Bowl parade. So you've seen her face and heard her voice many times. She is no longer at ESPN. We will talk about that a little later. But she has, among other things, reinvented herself as a free speech crusader and a critic of the cancellation culture. This dynamic woman who once was an anchor, fully scripted, has now become a moral voice. And here she is, Sage Steele. Thanks for joining us today.
Thank you, Thane.
If
Thank you
you
for
have,
having me. And people will, I got to say, though, so much at ESPN was unscripted. We winged it and ad-libbed it a lot, more than people realize because we're sportscasters, right? But now it's all winging it. And it's kind of cool to not have to hold back anymore, you know?
nobody's talking in your ear, telling you what to
Hey.
do. If you have questions for Sage, you can leave it in the Q&A box below your screen. If you're watching us, and we know that thousands are watching us live on both Facebook and YouTube, welcome. We love always having you with us as well. Don't forget to go to folks.org and drop off your email address so you'll get future announcements of upcoming events. Um, Sage, let's start with something that is just recently in the news, and it doesn't even involve you yet at all, which is the closing, the shuttering of Sports Illustrated.
Mm.
Uh, I'm older than you. To me, this is a shocker. Long before there was ESPN, there was just local TV sports programs on the news, and Sports Illustrated was the Bible. They had the best
Yes.
photos. They had great literary journalism. I may have thought of myself as a budding writer from reading weekly. It was a weekly in those days, Sports Illustrated, with incredible photos. We've become now, I guess, a more visual culture. How do you account for something like this even happening?
To me, it's not shocking, but it's certainly really, really sad because, like you, I mean, SI was everything. And I would run to the mailbox to get that magazine every single week when I was a kid. And it was not a cheap subscription, if I recall. And listen, my dad was in the Army for 23 years. And I mean, there's not a lot of money coming in there, but that was one of the subscriptions that my parents made sure that we kept because they knew my love of sports and faces in the crowd, right? I'd love to go through and see those high school kids
Yeah,
that many of them ended up being
I
on
remember that.
SportsCenter years later because of their athletic prowess. To me, when I say it's not a shock, it's because of where print has gone over the last decade plus. Obviously, I think with the internet and social media, things have changed, and you see it in linear television as well. So sad, but not surprising, based on I think also how uh, credible journalism isn't valued as much anymore, right? It's
And
more about clicks versus true journalism on many platforms, unfortunately.
So, and you and I emailed each other when we both heard this story. I thought one of the things I thought was shocking is I read, for a magazine that had credited itself for fine writing, apparently they were generating stories through artificial intelligence. Like, I don't know if you picked up on that, like that was among the many things. This was a magazine that was known for editing things 8, 9 times, and now they were publishing things that were computer generated.
Right.
So I don't know if
And
you picked
unfortunately, it
up on
doesn't
that.
seem like it doesn't feel like they're alone. And I mean, this has kind of been a story, an underlying story for a long time now. And now just recent months where it's like, oh my goodness, to what level does this AI have an influence on our industry, on our world, or does it potentially take over? That was very disappointing as well. I think there's so many journalists out there who still are true journalists who want to tell the story the right way, do the research, talk to people. God forbid you communicate and talk to people and get facts before pushing send, right? Very disappointing. But again, newspapers, magazines, that those print platforms are the ones that have taken the biggest hit, where everything has gone online. I don't know. It makes me sad because you're like, gosh, if SI goes down, what does that mean? Then you have people online talking a lot about, them going woke in many ways with the way that they chose to report. And sometimes you can say report, right? You have people talking about the SI swimsuit issue and how that went woke. And I mean, listen, like it or not, that was a big thing once a year when it came out. I liked looking at it too. The way that they have chosen to publish that has changed as well. So unfortunately, I think it's just a sign of the times that we're in. But the AI part was certainly disturbing. Again, not surprising to me.
Well, I can tell you that it's not surprising to me that since I had Sage Steele, she would jump on the thing that I was going to talk about next, which was the swimsuit issue. Because I actually wonder, I'm a man of a certain age and era, and I remember, Cheryl Tees and Carol Alt and Christy Brinkley, and I remembered that they sold tons of those, right? It was the first week of February, and it was a cultural event. And they did go woke. They were using transgender models. They were using plus size models, just to give people a sense if they didn't know. And that, of course, fits into the pattern of inclusivity, which I guess has its value. But one of the things that we're seeing in the sort of critical race theory, intersectional, woke, protocols is a kind of moral mandate. And it seemed to me that what they were saying was that beauty can be morally mandated as well. And that as if to say that beauty doesn't even have its own meritocracy. And it does. And that we were sort of, I think, being told, scolded, as we are in the modern era through the woke mindset of being mostly scolded and talked down to, that we were being told what's beautiful instead of actually experiencing it. So I was going to say, here's where we might get in trouble first for tonight, but you opened it up first. I was going to say, I wonder whether
Not the first time I've done that unintentionally.
Yeah, no, it's so typical Sage Steele.
No, I don't mean to be that way. I'm just super honest. And also, this is the beauty of getting a little bit older. Now I don't care. Like, I don't care because we are all allowed to have our opinions, right? Until we're not, until it doesn't fit the narrative of fill in the blanks. So then you get to a certain age where you're like, enough. And if you don't like what I'm saying, change the channel, click off, whatever it means. Like, you don't have to follow me. It's okay. Big picture, I do believe beauty is in the eye of the beholder. I absolutely do. Whether it's race, gender, eye color, hair color, size, I believe that. The interesting thing with the Sports Illustrated swimsuit issue for all those years is that it's sports, and usually to play sports successfully, you have to be in shape. Not that you can't be in okay shape if you're heavier. It's just, listen, let's follow the science. I know people like to pick and choose when they want to follow the science. When you look at the science and the facts about being in shape and fit, that doesn't usually include being obese or 40-50% body fat. I don't care what you do. I'm just saying that if we're looking at sport and health and ability to compete, those two things can't really go hand in hand. I loved it because to me, it was not just about people looking great, because again, that's in the eye of the beholder. It's about health. It was about health and being fit and caring about the body that God gave you, and also being proud and not afraid to show that, men and women, right? I mean, we've seen men posing as well, and it's about caring about that body that God gave you and working so hard to make sure it lasts as long as it can. That's what it was to me, but it was just also an example of hard work, because that didn't come naturally to them to be at that level of fitness. So to me, it inspired me to work out a little more. Would I have ever looked like one of those models? Absolutely not. But it does go to show you what hard work does. And again, obesity is not healthy. It's just not. So people can argue about what's pretty or not. That's fine. That's subjective. But the health part is not. And we have statistics to back it up. So stop trying to shove it down our throats in this way too. And that to me is unfortunate.
America's best known sports magazine was in every other instance rewarding people for their fitness, except when it came to the swimsuit issue. Where there we
But that's
said
just
when it comes,
recent. It goes along with the times. It wasn't like this
yeah,
10 years ago. We still had,
yeah,
everyday athletes in there and volleyball players. And by the way, celebrating women, the celebration of women who worked hard for that body, not to be sexy, but to be strong and fit and to compete at the top levels of their sport. That is why I had my daughters looking at. Yeah, you mentioned me at the co-hosting the Miss America competition with Chris Harrison, my good buddy, for a couple of years before that went woke, and they changed that too. And people used to say, especially the last few years, well, why is there the swimsuit competition? Why are they exposing them and walking across that stage with a bathing suit on? Number one, nobody forced them to. Number two, I brought my daughters to that to say, look at this. These women care about their bodies, care about being healthy and strong. It was not about the weight on the scale. It was about, are you healthy and are you strong? And are you standing up tall? Are you proud? So people like to make it controversial. Stop.
but to me, Sage, and we're going to get to some of this later. It's consistent with sort of the general attack against meritocracy. You're
Mhm.
talking like an old school, you're a daughter of a colonel in the army, where there's a certain standard of excellence that is expected. And one of the things we're being told as part of the cancellation culture is that much of these expectations are by definition racist or have hidden biases, right? And so,
Right.
again, to me, it's very consistent to say yes. And in fact, even when it comes to the swimsuit competition, it shouldn't be there because there's no real meritocracy when it comes to that. When in fact, there is. There is. That's how they were judging that. That didn't necessarily wasn't the fully definition of it, but obviously they were judging something, and that we have to expect that there is objective criteria for things, and that what we're seeing is an
Mhm.
attack against excellence, meritocracy, and objective criteria. And I would say I hadn't thought about what you were saying about two things. One, that Sports Illustrated was not in many ways honoring fitness, and secondly, the Miss America pageant, there's there's nothing wrong with having a swimsuit competition.
No, nothing wrong with showing what hard work can do, you know?
Yeah,
And to me, and again, it isn't about the weight or what size jeans you fit into. Are you healthy and are you
healthy.
strong? And people can talk about, no, look, I'm healthy and I'm 100 pounds overweight, but look, my vitals came back. Okay, okay, great. But
Okay.
that doesn't mean that we all have to accept that. It's kind of like the
Yeah.
pronoun thing. Okay, you can say you're a guy today and a girl tomorrow. That's fine. I'm not going to go along and switch it every day based on what you believe that day. But I'll call you by your name. That's fine.
Yeah.
It's just
No, and that's
you can believe what you want, but to force others to believe the
yeah.
way you do, that's when we lose everything in the society. And that's what at some point, I don't know. I can't tell people what to do. For me, I just refuse to participate in that.
And it's clear, and we'll talk about this in a moment, that it viscerally affected you. It does sound, I'm hearing it again in your voice. It viscerally affects you to be told that there are mandates, whether they're vaccine mandates, whether there are beauty mandates. I think that it's just doesn't sit right with you, right? I think that these things all have a certain level of consistency. And what I'm pointing out is I think that what it means to be woke picks up on a lot of these ideas that the old criteria is somehow wrong and immoral, and one should be banished for even thinking that way. And so, therefore, we need to
Yeah.
reprogram people. They have to be reprogrammed to do things with a certain level of intellectual or ideological conformity. And if they don't, they're bad people, right? And we're learning
Right.
this on, whether it's cable news When I was a kid watching Walter Cronkite, I'm of a certain era, nobody knew. First of all, a third of the country, Sage, you were too young to know this, was watching Walter Cronkite, a third of the country, and no one knew if he was a Democrat or Republican. Think about that.
Yes.
Nobody knew who the
Yeah.
leading anchor in America. We wouldn't know, and nobody cared because that wasn't
Yeah,
his
but
job.
that's how it should be. Absolutely. You're gonna love this story. I'm gonna go back to 1988, which, by the way, I'm probably older than some people think. I'm gonna totally age myself. 1988, I was a junior in high school, sophomore, junior in high school, graduated in 1990. So go back to that 88 election, and I remember in a civics class in high school talking about the election and the candidates. So I came home, and we lived in Colorado Springs at the time. My dad was stationed at Fort Carson in Colorado, and I remember coming home to my parents and saying, "Hey, we talked about this in class today. So who are you going to vote for?" And I was just curious, just to know where my parents stood. And my mom looked at me and said, "It's none of your business." And I was like,
Wow.
"What? What are you talking about?" And she said, "No, I'm not trying to be mean, but we have our own reasons for voting for whomever. We want you to determine that on your own. You go do your
Love that.
homework, you go study,
Love that.
you go figure out who you want to vote for and why." So it's funny, people number one always have assumed that they knew my politics. No one ever asked. It's fascinating how people assume based on one opinion you may have shared. Number two, they also assumed that they knew my politics based on the fact that my dad was in the Army and a West Point
Of course.
graduate, and military only think one way. My parents did the best job of that in hindsight, right? Of saying, we're not going to tell you what we believe. We don't want to influence you. We want you to go figure it out on your own. Um, and I think that is so important. And then to be respectful with your decisions and your choices after that. It's funny when you talk about mandates, et cetera. I retweeted Kamala Harris, the vice president, today. It just made me mad because, and I don't think I've ever retweeted her or President Biden or anybody. I try to just stay out of it, but lately, what the heck. And so she said something about how we trust women to make choices about their bodies and their future. And immediately my mind just went to, oh, wait, but what happened to all those vaccine mandates when you were
Yeah.
saying, if you don't do this, then fill in the blank? So again, we pick and choose when we want to allow people to be themselves, to make decisions for their own bodies, don't we? So it's just the inconsistency, it's the hypocrisy of it all. To me, it comes down, though, to, the big picture is, and this is something that I've been preaching for years and years when I started to speak at colleges and universities, probably 15 years ago, 20 years ago, long before DEI was anything, was an acronym. I used to say diversity of thought, like practice diversity of thought, but mean it, because that's where it all begins. And so we can be very different and have different thoughts. I have friends and family. We think so differently on so many topics, but guess what? I love them and they love me because our opinions don't define us as who we are as human beings, as friends, as daughters, as neighbors. Diversity of thought is where it begins. And if you don't have that, then I honestly, I don't actually want to be around you because you're being hypocritical of what you're preaching, right? It is truly about what I believe and what you believe and leading with kindness and doing this, having a conversation. But when you tell me what I'm supposed to believe based on what? My race, my gender, my religion, you've completely lost me. You are actually going against everything that you're preaching. So if we continue to accept that, then I almost think we deserve what's coming. When we don't stand up and say, wait. You say accept everybody, be accepting and tolerant and diverse, but only, in these areas. So I'm done with it. And I'm hoping that continuing to have conversations with you and others by practicing what I preach, that others will not be as afraid. And I'll end with this. I get the fear thing. Like, I understand it. I'm actually like a poster child for why people stay silent, because then you get canceled. But then it's like, oh, wait, I'm still standing. I'm still here.
Yeah.
Every time you
Yeah.
push through that fear of speaking, it gets a tiny bit easier. And then you have some tough decisions to make. But if we're silent, I believe that we will pay, unfortunately, with the way that our country is heading right now.
Well, I think you're right, of course, and your friends and family that allow a diversity of thought. Frankly, Sage, I think that's rare. I just think most people tell stories that I was told because I liked something on Twitter, or I had a comment that they won't let their kids play with my kids, or no longer invited to dinner. We're living in an incredibly ideologically intolerant era, and I want to get to what you just said a moment ago. Let's just get to it. To me, although you left ESPN on your own terms, pursuant to a settlement of a lawsuit that you brought against them. And I like to always make that clear when I speak of Sage Steele. She left on her own terms. She'd sued them and was still speaking her mind, even as the lawsuit was commencing, before she left. But you are, to me, when you said poster child, you really are, to me, the most intriguing of the cancellation culture anecdotes. The most intriguing, by far. Why? Well, let's just, for the audience that doesn't know, you were on, what was his name? The quarterback for the Chicago Bears, Jay Cutler's podcast. And he mentioned, you apparently had a bandage on your arm, and you mentioned the vaccine mandates, and you said that you were opposed to them. You weren't on ESPN at the time. You were on someone else's show, and you just said, I did it. I just came back from a drugstore and I did it, but I'm actually opposed to the mandate. I think somewhere around that time, somebody found out that years earlier, you said something on The View. You had been a regular guest on The View, and you said something to me that is so obvious that the fact that this would haunt you is truly shocking. And it goes to something that you said about your parents, because I want to bring them back into this. Because you said, when someone said, how do you identify yourself? You happen to be biracial, black or white, and you said, I'm both. And Barbara Walters apparently insisted that you have to pick one. And then she decided to give you the moral authority of, let me discipline you, Sage, by telling you that the president of the United States, Barack Obama, is biracial, and he identifies himself as black. And what you said is exactly what I would say, because I actually know Obama's brother, his younger brother. And I thought, well, okay, but the father left the family, and two white ladies took you to Hawaii. They had PhDs. You would not be president without the white ladies. There's nothing wrong with being black and respecting both sides, but to dismiss the white side of you seems wrong. And you didn't say that, simply said, well, his father left the family, but I'm not going to pick one. And I think what you were saying essentially is, I have too much respect for my mom. I have too much respect for what she did for all of us, for me to dismiss her as part of my genetic code. Those two comments, and then something later that you said that you were opposed to transgender athletes competing in collegiate sports, was the slow burn, the slow erosion of this, meteoric career at ESPN. Those were the three instances. So I guess I want to talk to you about a couple things that maybe you can address. One, what is it like to feel canceled? Number one. And number two, what was the real cancellation? Was it social media barrage? Was it people at work that had negative things to say? Did people pull away from you? Did they pull away from you for genuine reasons or political reasons? Meaning, were they actually shocked and offended, appalled by what you said? Or did they say, you know what, it's a better career move for me not to have lunch with Sage?
All of the above. All of the above. One thing I learned about ESPN over those years, and especially I'd say the last 5 or 6 years, where it got, well, probably since Donald Trump's election in 2016, when then people were starting to go crazy and say crazy things, and it was accepted. And then because it went along with the narrative of the company and the leadership at the time, and certainly now as well, it feels like, for what they allow. But that's when things just kind of started to spiral out of control. And what I noticed is that they were reactive, not proactive, when something came up. So we're going to stay quiet for a few days until we see how much Twitter reacts and how explosive it is. And then we're going to give you a call, and then we're going to say, you better take that post down, or, from there it would go. And with me, it certainly went. And it was a few days of it simmering after my comments on Jay Cutler's podcast. And then Yes, you had many peers speaking out and tweeting. They always told us they were against. We're not allowed to, no ESPN on ESPN crime. You can't attack people. They used to uphold that in some instances when Tony Kornheiser attacked Hannah Storm's outfit 10, 12 years ago. They suspended him for 2 weeks and took a lot of money, and that was then. And then with me, it was allowed, and people were allowed to attack and allowed to say they wouldn't go on the show with me. So listen, big picture, before I go further, this isn't even about me anymore, Thane. And I think my goal and my point with this. It's to talk deeply about the cancel culture and the hypocrisy of it, and then to really, really preach about diversity of thought. And that is what my lawsuit was all about. You can't pick and choose who you allow to speak based on the narrative that your company is choosing to go with that day, that moment. And all I knew was that day I was talking about my experiences as a biracial woman who was told her whole life that she wasn't enough. She had to choose. By the way, that's a topic for another day, where one culture, and quite often it's the Black America, certainly, my goodness, not everybody, but where for biracial people like me, you're told you better choose, and it better be this or else you're out. And then you're not invited to the picnic, and then you're canceled, and then you're all these things, barbecue, whatever it is. Like, I've heard that my whole life. And I think you do question, and then you go, wait a minute. Okay, Barbara Walters, congratulations to the president, which is what I said. His father, as he wrote in his book, was not there, and his mother and grandmother raised him. And who cares? At the end of the day, this man made history. And I was thrilled for that history, because my grandmother, at the time, it was 90 plus years old when he was elected, was in tears and sobbing and so grateful that we'd made such progress in this country. And I was too. Even if I didn't vote for him, I still was appreciative of the progress that we had made. And with that, we thought came even more diversity. It seems like we went backwards since then. But I'm allowed to share my experience and my why. The joke that I'll always stick with, and maybe it's not that funny, but for me, it just kind of simplifies it. I'm pretty sure my white mom was there the day I was born on November 28th, 1972. She was there. And so you're not going to tell me to ignore her or that she's any less than my Black father. I came here because of both of them, and I think we know how that works. What a blessing that I grew up in such a diverse family with love from everybody, the white side, the Black side. I mean, to me, that's the definition of diversity. I feel so fortunate, right? And when people say, they get mad when you say, I don't see color. Obviously, don't take that literally. We all see it. But the point is, for me and for my family and for millions of Americans out there, I know I'm speaking for so many people, our race does not dictate how we judge others, how we see others. It's the human aspect. Now, how you treat me from there, that changes things, right? But if you lead everything with race, we're never going to progress. So I've gone all over here. I'm sorry. I get so passionate because these are all people who are preaching diversity of thought. And then what happens when you don't go along with what they say? So I have zero regrets about standing up for my entire family, not just one part of it. I have zero regrets talking about the vaccine mandate. It wasn't the vax, it was the mandate. And if you want to get 12 boosters and wear 10 masks the rest of your life, go for it. For me to force someone to do something to their bodies is exactly the opposite of what they're preaching, right? Body autonomy, my body, my choice. And just let me decide. Now look, right? When more and more facts have come out, and even Fauci has admitted so much. So if you're going to allow the other side, and in my case, coworkers, to say whatever they wanted on ESPN shows and platforms about the Don't Say Gay bill, where those words were never in that bill in Florida, but nobody chose to read it, or about anything. Like, you can't, how about, what did I say? Don't say gay. How about Roe versus Wade? That stuff was mentioned on ESPN airwaves during sports programming. But I can't go on the side and talk about my experiences as a biracial woman. All I need is consistency. You can't allow some and not others. And so my goal in continuing to speak out is for companies and bosses and leaders to really listen and say, true diversity of thought means I can express my opinion and this person can too. long as there's no hate or threats directed,
Mm.
but we can all tell our stories, right? That should be the goal. That is what diversity means. And that's my goal in continuing to speak out. That was why I sued them. I mean, hello, David versus Goliath, me, Disney, ESPN. It broke my heart to have to make that decision, knowing it was going to end my career at that network at least. 16 years, my dream job. Zero regrets. If anything, I'm super proud because I know through thousands of DMs and messages and emails that I've received from people, people that I knew, people who would come to me in the bathroom and quietly say thank you, but they were afraid to speak up there on that
Yeah,
campus. I
yeah.
know it's bigger than me, and I'm excited, even though I don't know what the future holds specifically. I do have some fun things going, but like when you do something like this, it's about doing it for who's next or who's already in the trenches but is afraid. What a blessing to be
But you,
able to now speak up for those people who are fearful. And that's our job. I have no choice in my mind. Like if I die tomorrow, at least I died trying because it's been exhausting to get here, but this is so worth it for the people I don't know, including how about my kids? I had to do this.
so it's interesting. You pointed out a few things. One was the intellectual hypocrisy that colleagues of yours on the air were offering their opinions on, again, the correct, politically correct script. Your problem was you were deviating from the script, and you weren't allowed to deviate from the script even off camera on their show. That was the real outrage, I thought, that it's
Wait,
not
Dave,
as
real
if
quick, if I had
ESPN.
said this, I'm sorry to interrupt you. If I had said,
Yeah,
all of you anti-vaxxers out there who refuse to get it, shame on you. If I had said that, I'd be fine. If I had said, listen, no offense to my white mom, but look at me, I am
yeah.
black and Black Lives Matter, I would still have a job there. I would never have been punished. So that's the point. People can deny it all they want, but I think we all know the truth based on what? Not based on my opinion, based on what my dad calls your track record. And the company, my former company and many others, their track record speaks volumes. That's all we need to know.
Well, it's interesting. People sometimes talk about Colin Kaepernick's situation, and I don't think they fully understand the constitutional issue there, which is that generally speaking, although not so much in Connecticut, you're very lucky that Connecticut actually has a statute, has a law that says you can't retaliate against employees for their speech outside the office, right? So you happen to have been in the right state, and that's something I think
People
people
always
should
confuse that.
understand.
They thought my lawsuit against First Amendment based government is very different from
Yeah,
employment. And yet, I'm
no,
glad that you said that. State of
no.
Connecticut is why my lawsuit was filed in the first place. We're not idiots, and
Yeah,
that's why we had the ability to take a stand.
right. I mean, people don't understand that Colin Kaepernick's taking a knee. People say, what about his First Amendment rights? Not with a private employer. The First Amendment applies when the government stops you from speaking. It doesn't do it when the employer, if the state of California said to everyone in the state, everyone must rise for the playing of the national anthem, including players, and take your hats off, that's a First Amendment violation. But if the San Francisco 49ers want to say, we want our players standing at attention, we also want them to wear suits at press conferences, that's the job. The difference, what happened with you, is that it was as if to say Disney and ABC and ESPN would look the other way if you said the politically correct thing
Yes.
on air. But if you said the politically incorrect thing, no matter where you were, you didn't have to be on air, you would get punished. But I have a theory about this that goes to the racial issue with respect to you. I either heard, read somewhere that Halle Berry even took a position that she was upset by, I guess, your Obama comment. And because of that, she wasn't attending something that you were hosting. And to me, that was where the wheels came off the bus. Because then I thought, wait a minute, she's biracial and she was raised by a white mother. And then I thought about something else, which you probably know, but some people in the audience don't. Part of the critical race critique of, the white supremacist culture that we live in, purportedly, the systemically white racist, is to say that even intact families is a racist comment. To actually invoke that as important is racist. Now, I know that there are people watching this and that can't be true. I'm telling you, I've spent my career in universities and mainstream media. That is being said right now. That somehow the idea that families are not intact, that is part of the white power structure. And there's that, as if to say, well, but wait a minute, studies show that intact families, children do better, right? And I was thinking, what does this have
It's a
in
fact.
common? Right. What does this have in common? Well, Sage Steele's parents stayed together. And so she was really reflecting on that history of the Steeles. And instead,
Yeah.
what we were really being saying is we're punishing her for invoking something that we believe is ultimately racist, which is rewarding the intact family. I don't know if you thought about that before, but that's what I thought of when I read about Halle Berry.
Yeah, a lot of layers there. I haven't thought about that, and that's certainly interesting. I think a lot of it would take actually getting into the minds of some of these people because most of them are too afraid to speak the
Yeah.
truth. And I think many of them are practicing things that they don't even fully believe inside. But there's too much tied to it. There's the finances, their position, their reputation, all the above. People are leading with fear despite it not coming across that way. When you talk about those comments with families being deemed racist, to me, I liken it to the voting laws, in particular, what happened at the last election in Georgia, and how it's requiring people to show identification when they're voting is racist. Like I can't. It's just
I love that you
comical
said
because
that.
that
I
apparently
cannot
means
tell
that all
you.
black. Yeah,
Yeah, no, I
that to
love that
me
you
means
said
that
that.
you're saying that all black people are too stupid to remember to bring their ID, or they don't have one, and like it's just so insulting. It's so insulting, and I'll never
It's
stop speaking out about
racist,
that
actually.
junk. It's
Sage,
actually
it's
totally
racist.
racist. Yes.
It's actually racist. And you know how I know this? I lived in Harlem for 12 years, and I was really the one white guy on the block. There were others, but on that block, I was the only white guy. And I can tell you something,
Hmm.
Sage, something you won't be shocked to hear. I didn't know any African American in Harlem that didn't know how to get a driver's license or a voter
Of
ID
course.
card.
It's
It's so
embarrassing
gross.
that this is even a
It's
thing. They're
embarrassing.
doing
I didn't
whatever
know.
it takes to invoke the word racism. Can I tell you real quick about the Halle Berry thing? It was at the ESPNW summit, for which I really helped get off the ground, and I was the main host for the first 11 years of its inception. And so I was the host, the MC, but also that year, which is 2021, supposed to have a one-on-one conversation with Halle Berry. And then the comments came out, which were misconstrued about what I said about Obama, because of course the headlines came out that Sage
Yeah.
Steele thinks Barack Obama isn't black enough or shouldn't identify as black. Like nothing at all what I said. People take what they want, and that's their right. That's where we are today. But I was told by the leadership group that Halle's people, not sure if it even got to Halle, who knows, Halle's people said that they wouldn't allow her to come if I were still moderating, hosting the conversation, which again, it goes back to, first of all, that's Hollywood. It doesn't surprise me. It's the same group of people who I know manage George Clooney, and there's a lot there. But secondly, it goes back to, my goodness, diversity, diversity of thought. And oh, by the way, what an interesting conversation that would have been. And you know what? Someday it's one of my goals is to talk to Halle Berry because I've loved her and respected her from afar for 100 years. But I mean, two women who are biracial, who have probably some things that they can share about being raised, with a white mother, a black father. It was the same case with her, and I don't know that her father was around when she was growing up. But the
No,
the
I think
biggest
they divorced. She
hypocrisy,
wasn't around. Right.
yeah, I think the biggest hypocrisy in it was, you know, ESPNW, which had been an incredible experience for me, uplifting women and making sure women in sport were uplifted, and we made sure that we got extra highlights and more coverage on our airwaves and online, and it was a beautiful thing. And as the host for the first 11 years, and it's a 2.5 day summit, um, on stage, it's all we would talk about is uplifting and bringing people together and uplifting women who are different and diverse and have different beliefs and experiences and from different countries even, and bringing them, shining the light on them. And then when me, and who happened to be the host for all those years, thought differently, well then let's silence her or not stand up for her. So um, honestly, I just want consistency because I think it can be a confusing time for women. no matter where we are in the country as far as who's in office in the White House, there's always about 50% of the other half of the country, right, that isn't thrilled with who's in
Yeah.
office. It's always about 50-50. So I say, gosh, shouldn't you just try to bring in everyone? In this case, all women. It doesn't matter what side of the aisle you fall on or who you vote for or your race or your gender, I didn't think, unless it does. Like, I think we just, what are the rules now? Because it does seem to be changing. When the goalpost is constantly moving, it's hard to keep up. What I know is that if we truly mean it, diversity, diversity of thought, we can't do it just when it's convenient for us, just when it fits our narrative, whether it's as friends and family and neighbors, or as employers, or as the commander in chief.
So you may remember, you were in very good company on this subject, Sage. We had Barry Weiss on before she started the Free Press. It was shortly after she left the New York Times, and she was forced to leave. The whole staff in the op-ed section, you may remember, of Senator Tom Cotton. He simply had the outrage to suggest that maybe the Insurrection Act should be invoked in order to quell some of the violence that were offshoots of the Black Lives Matter movement. The staff went nuts. It was immediately racist, and everyone who was in any way involved in, remember, this is the opinion of a United States senator. And let me just point something else out. The Insurrection Act was also used to integrate universities and schools in the Deep South. There's nothing racist about the Insurrection Act. Calling out the National Guard is how African-American children got to school in Alabama and Mississippi. So there's nothing racist about the Insurrection Act. If anything, it was pro-integration, pro-race. But everyone was essentially eliminated from that. And the New York Times made this incredible apology. And we had Barry Weiss here. And I will tell you, she said similar things. People said, I'm almost disgusted to say this. She was reading things like on the Slack thing, like the fat Jewish girl. These are the colleagues at the New York Times were referring to her in this way. And it's good riddance to you. But one of the things that I can think of, right? Good riddance, she left and now she's in an incredible spot with the Free Press. But what I will say is that
the work that she's doing is helping so many. And frankly, Barry Weiss gave so many of us the courage to stand up.
I bet, yeah. And so what's interesting to me, though, and it happened to you as well, maybe it's just a Disney thing, although it was the New York Times thing. Disney also got in trouble with, as you said, the Don't Say Gay bill, which it doesn't say don't say gay. It's simply the Parental Rights and Education Act. The parents should be involved in what's being taught to children, young children, when it comes certainly to sexuality. But Disney responded to this because their employees went nuts. And I keep wondering, and again, you've described that people at ESPN employees, and I'm going, why are the kids in charge? Like, why is it Disney, the guy wearing the Goofy costume? Why is the guy wearing nothing wrong with Goofy, but the Goofy costume guy made the decision, right, that he was outraged by this law in Florida, or that kids right out of college somehow forced the New York Times to retract and disavow an op-ed from a United States senator? Like, to me, there's something really twisted here, right? That, to me, ESPN should have been standing next to you, the chieftains of it. They should have put their arms around you like Pee Wee Reese put his arm around Jackie Robinson to say, she's allowed to talk. She's biracial. She's had her own experience. She's allowed to say things. And by the way, she's allowed to say that she doesn't like the vaccine mandate. Doesn't harm us. She's allowed to have that opinion. So I'm wondering whether you have any thoughts about who's in charge, who's really making these decisions, who's everyone afraid of? Is it the social media mob? Is it yapping young employees that, I would have said to the New York Times staffers, don't come back. You obviously don't know what happens at a newspaper. You don't know. Something you got missed, and don't come back anymore. Anyway.
Yeah. First of all, I believe it was a relatively small group of people out in California in the Burbank headquarters offices that were against the Florida, again, we say it in quotes because that's what they made up, is the Don't Say Gay. a pretty small group that was preparing to move to the Orlando offices, to the Florida offices,
Oh, wow.
and then this came up,
Interesting.
went crazy, and then they had to listen, or they chose to listen, and then to blow everything up from there. And I don't think that all the leadership wanted to. I think there were some very influential people in the background, um, maybe on the board, who were saying, "Oh no, no, we have to make a big deal of this because of Florida, because of Ron DeSantis, because of, again, what they wanted, what they chose to interpret from a bill that never said those words, 'Don't say gay.'" I think that's the
Right.
disappointing part, is that an entire company, which has incredible people leading it and making the magic for so many years as Disney, um, has been in many ways overtaken by people who choose to be offended over everything. At the end of the day,
Yeah.
there's always going to be people who aren't happy, who have feelings hurt, and we have to pay attention to those. But we can't do it. It's, the boy who cried wolf and people who want attention. So with that, I don't think it was a massive group, but it was a group that now people with all the DEI are afraid to
Yeah.
upset.
Well,
And to that end, go ahead.
no. I was just gonna say they call it now the grievance culture, right? That
Right.
everyone has their grievance, and their grievance is pushed back at you, and it's led to all this corporate censorship and censorship among friends. It's important to remember we are, as a nation, Sage, we are very permissive on free speech under Supreme Court precedent. The Constitution is clear. The government can't stop you from speaking. We've allowed cross burnings and neo-Nazis marching on communities, Holocaust survivors. So there's a tension between what the law mandates, which is a freedom to speak unrestricted by government interference, and a cultural mandate, which says we will tell you what to think and speak. And if you don't, we will censure you or banish you. And I think we're not
Hmm.
confronting the conflict between the Constitution and the way we're acting in universities and in corporations, because the way we're acting in universities and corporations is fundamentally un-American. It's illiberal and un-American.
Right.
And we're tolerating this. We're actually okay with this, instead of saying we, among other Western democracies, have much more permissive free speech laws than any of the others in Europe, except when it comes to this. When it comes to this, we
Hmm.
tell you what to say, and if you don't follow the script, we'll kick you out. Um, I want
It's
to
so
jump before we get to some
disturbing. It's so scary. I was just going to say real quick that I know leaders at ESPN and at Disney who do not agree with the way that things are being held. I know that there were people in my corner, um, quietly, and stayed quiet because they're fearful of being checked as well, punished, disciplined as well. I understand that. I do. I do have empathy for people who have this fear, because I know what that feels like. Listen, I stayed quiet for many years on many issues and topics. I would talk privately with bosses at times. It's like, I know, trust me. And they, I agree. They give me that look. And then we have to go ahead and make this other decision anyway. So it's going to take leaders choosing to actually lead to stop this. And it has to be, in numbers and power in numbers, right? I mean, I don't know how else it's going to happen. And I've thought about it a lot with the issue now with the
yeah,
transgender sports, right? And making sure that women's sports stay with women after all this preaching in Title IX for all these years, right? And I have so many people who reach out to me, online, and even DMs and text, people I've never met in the industry, who are like, "I so agree with you. Please know that you're not alone, but I'm afraid to say something." Men and women. And that fear is real. However, the only way we change this is if we speak up. So, can we lock arms? Can we find a way? I don't know. It's actually something I'm trying to look into now, because I'm so desperate to help these women and girls who for years were told, "We got you." And now all of a sudden, all those same people are silent. So I just know that there's a real struggle, and it comes from a genuine place with many people. But at the end of the day, if you're in a leadership position and you're choosing to ignore this, shame on you.
right. Well, yeah. What about this issue? You were vocal about transgender athletes in competing in collegiate sports while you were still at ESPN. I think you were making comments even while the lawsuit was ongoing. And seems strange. It seems interesting. Like, where is the feminist movement on this? Right? Why?
That's my
Why
point.
aren't
That's
they?
my whole point with all of
Yeah, why?
this. They're
Where are
silent
they?
now.
Where's the
Yeah.
same people marching for Me Too don't want to say any, have nothing to say here? And similarly, I learned a lesson from your mom. You know what that lesson is? I'm not asking you who you vote for. I don't care. So that's private. But I will say that I am seeing you on Fox because that's oddly enough nowadays a natural platform. But it does make me think. When I was in college, I was reading Thomas Sowell. Thomas Sowell still teaches at
Brilliant.
Stanford. Right, brilliant. Shelby Steele, they teach there. Why is it that this country doesn't know Black intellectuals? We don't know their names. We don't know their books. We don't know what they look like. It's just, to me, there's something, again, speaking as a Jewish man, I don't understand it. I find it, again, it's very, to me, degrading, paternalistic, racist to say, look, ours is a culture of dependency and weakness and victimization. I know that, Barack Obama was president for 8 years and received more votes than John Kerry did from white people. And there were two secretaries of state in a row who were African American. I've written about this. People are critical. I can speak as a law professor. There's racism in the United States. There's just not systemic racism. As a Jew, I would say there's anti-Semitism, but I don't think it's systemic anti-Semitism. But we are being told racism, white supremacy is the worst thing that's happening in the United States. And it has colored so many issues, politically and cultural. And I think you got stuck in that vacuum somehow.
Yeah, I think so. And I will say it's okay. I wouldn't change a single thing that has happened to me, for me, because I do believe it's all for a reason. That has a lot to do with my faith and learning throughout all these years that, man, I'm stronger than I thought. And I do, for some reason, went from this really, really shy little girl who was afraid of her own shadow to saying, no more, because I realized, I don't know, maybe it's that patriot in me from my military upbringing where I'm like, no, 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 I got to fight for my friends, you know? I love that you brought up some of those names, and Shelby Steele and Thomas Sowell and, Dr. Benjamin Carson, who to me is a true
Yes,
hero, who grew up with
yes,
nothing and chose to say, no, no, no. And his mother, no father, his mother was there and pushed him. I mean, what a brilliant man. It doesn't mean you have to agree with what his politics are, but you can look at his story and appreciate and celebrate him. Condoleezza Rice is one of my heroes. I've met her once. I spoke
yes,
to her on the phone once. I cried each time because I thought, what courage it takes, right? And how she is not consistently celebrated as a history maker in our country, as a woman, as a Black woman, is disgusting and inexcusable. So we go back to an African American community and diversity and accept us and tolerance and all of these things, but only if you fit in this little box. Like, we as a culture are so diverse and have so many beautiful things about us, just like Jewish people, right? Just any community that you want to name that lives in this country. And to not celebrate certain people because they don't fit into that narrative is absolutely inexcusable and hypocritical. And
they can
again,
only be one
racist.
thing. They can
People
only be
say
one
Black
thing.
people can't be racist, and I'm like, wait, we all have that in us. And I'll be quiet. I'll let you talk here. But at the end of the day, as long to me, let's be realistic. As long as there is humanity, there will be prejudice, there will be racism. So we can work hard to address it, absolutely, but you can't change people's hearts. What you can do is you can have conversations and you can stop with the hypocrisy and celebrate everybody, not just those who fit into what you believe.
Let's take one question from the audience and I'll wrap up a little. And I love this question. It fits in so nicely. Sage, this comes from a man named Ray. Do you have any political aspirations? And because I think, you're living proof of someone who has a huge public following and your options are open. And you've been a media personality. Nowadays, you could be a social media influencer. I don't know if you have, I always have thoughts like, well, to me, I don't even know what that means, right? Because it seems to me one thing, media anchors, there's writers and editors and producers. There's a lot more involvement, and social media, you're on your own. And again, I guess maybe there's this sort of impulse towards excellence that I want the very best people on the field. I always feel that way. Put the best team on the field. So what lies ahead for you? How do we answer it?
Yeah. As far as politics, it's funny, I've been asked that question a lot. And there were some conversations that people came to me here in the state of Connecticut, and I just thought, I am so honored. Thank you. Hell no, I don't want to get into politics. Sorry. To me, it's just, honestly, there's so much negativity. I'm really a glass half full person. People will come at you and make up lies and do things I have no interest in. I have 3 kids, 2 in college. My 3rd child about to be next year. I'll have 3 kids in college at once. Pray for me. I would like to be an advocate for certain issues that I feel strongly about, that I feel can help others. And that does include freedom of speech, diversity of thought. That I'm very passionate about that. So I think that there's a way to influence and help and assist and lead without being a flat out politician, where there's so many polls and there's some ugliness that I'm not interested in. But it's been really flattering.
You'd get a lot of votes, not just from the people on.
I don't know.
You get a lot of votes.
Where.
There are a lot of people rooting for you. No, Sage, there are a lot of people rooting for you. Sports, last question here. Sports entertainment. ESPN is entertainment sports. So it makes you think, well, is sports really about entertainment? Is sports, in your mind, as culturally relevant now, or more so than it has been? I know that the interest in women's sport has tripled. That must please you in terms of overall interest. Collegiate women's sports, professional basketball. Do you think we're a sports obsessed culture and that we should have less of that? I can tell you, I oftentimes, just out of curiosity, listen to sports talk radio. And it's interesting how nuanced the conversations are, how people have so much information and they speak with such degree of passion. And I think to myself, God, there's more freedom of diversity of thought in sports, where people get on radio and have all sorts of, and they don't yell at each other. They don't scream it. They don't insult each other.
There's definitely some yelling, especially down in the SEC country and Paul Feinbaum. It's great. Here's what I'll say. When I was 11 years old and wanted to become a sportscaster, I knew from a very young age, because I felt it. I felt how it brought people together. And on a Sunday afternoon, on NFL Sunday, you have 80,000 people in a stadium, and they're all cheering for the same team, right? For 3 hours. It doesn't matter your race, your gender, your socioeconomic status, your politics. It brings people together. That's what I think people love about sports. That's what people didn't like and don't like right now about many sports platforms, ESPN, many of them, that have let politics infiltrate into the coverage. And I think that's hard, because people have always viewed this as a connector. And most importantly, really, I think an escape from the reality that so many people have, whether it is ugly politics or maybe they're going through something at home. Maybe it's a relationship, maybe it's their health, but sports brings people together. And that's why I wanted to be a part of it, to help bring people together, to help tell stories of people overcoming adversity and perseverance and winning, because sports can, I think, how people handle it can actually influence us throughout our lives, and pushing through and trying your hardest and being the best if you can. I think we need more of it. I just think we need less people trying to influence it politically. Not that they can't have opinions, not that athletes can't have opinions. I just think there's a time and place, and we come to you because we love you and what you've accomplished. You're our dream. I could never go be an Olympian. So I watch the Olympics going, I'm in awe of them, To me, sport is a connector. We need more with less of the crap being infiltrated inside of it. Sorry.
And Sage, I guess you would agree, more globalized now, right? Even Americans are following the World Cup in a way that they never did. We have players, transformational, transcendent players in the NBA who are Europeans. right? That we're starting to
Oh,
see
big
more and
time
more.
European in the NBA, and look at how much the NFL has committed to playing games outside of
Yeah,
this country, whether it's Mexico City
Berlin,
or
London.
Germany or London, and it continues to
Yeah.
expand, and that is a beautiful thing. Everybody's watching how we do it, and I think we can continue to do it better, go back to how it was, and let it be an escape and motivation for Americans. That's a fabric of our culture, and I'll never let go of that thought. It's important and it's part of us. We just need it to stay a little more focused. Don't try to influence people. Just go play.
That is a great way to end the evening. Before we say goodnight to Sage, we have some announcements about future, some upcoming events, and some other announcements, and we'll say good. Let's see, our next event up, yep, February 4th. That's the face of General David Petraeus, who would have
Oh, he's
impressed
amazing.
Sage's father, would have very much impressed your father, who was a colonel in the Army. If your father, if I remember, was the first African American to play football at West Point. I
First
mean,
to play
that's
varsity football.
really,
1966, he broke the color barrier there. He was an All-American, actually drafted in the NFL, despite back in 1970, you had no chance of
I
going.
love
You
that.
had to serve. But yeah, that's my guy, my dad and my mom.
Yeah.
They're my everything.
So David Petraeus will be with us on February 4th. Let's see if we can get that slide back on, Isaiah. Yeah, there. No, that's not it. Let's go back. Yep, there we go. Take out your phone if you have it handy and scan the QR code, and you can register there. You may remember Petraeus was, among other things, he's probably one of the most famous of the battlefield commanders in the United States. He commanded the surge in Iraq, and he was the commander of the NATO U.S. forces in Afghanistan. He's also a former director of the CIA. And we're going to talk about Iraq. We're going to talk about Iran and Ukraine and Gaza and the new laws of war and the rules of engagement that really people don't understand. But I think the general will teach us. So that's on February 4th. And what else do we have? I think we got something else coming up. Ah, yes. Perfect for Sage Steele. We have an event, the future of the First Amendment. Future of the First Amendment, which is in co-production with the 92nd Street Y. It'll be a live event and a virtual event at the same time. As we've learned in talking to Sage, again, this sort of lack of viewpoint diversity and this succumbing to corporate censorship. We're going to talk about the new protocols and the rules of free speech on university campuses and in courts. We have a really great group of people. So we've got the former president of the ACLU, Nadine Strossen. We have America's leading First Amendment lawyer, many years represented the New York Times and CBS, Floyd Abrams, and the Pulitzer Prize winning columnist for the New York Times, Bret Stephens. So that will be on March 10th. Again, scan the QR code, or you can, if you could go to any of the chat boxes below, you can also register that way. And then I think we have some other events that we haven't really announced, although there is one that we don't have the artwork for, but I think it's on April 7th. We're doing a night devoted to all the Donald Trump cases. We're going to look at them.
Oh my
And we've
goodness.
got very interesting. We've got Laura Coates, who is the senior chief legal analyst at CNN. We have Preet Bharara, former United States attorney here in the Southern District of New York, and Neil Katyal from MSNBC, who's both a legal analyst, and I think he's argued 50 cases before the Supreme Court. You know, Sage, we always say about folks' conversations, nobody ever leaves dumber. Everybody always leaves much smarter. And you
I
raised
hope
our
that I
game.
continued that trend.
You
I don't
raised our
know.
game.
But can I just thank you
You raised
for
our,
what you all are doing and having these conversations that I think are so crucial. And I just hope that everyone out there knows they're not alone. And the more we share and speak up, the more you realize you're not alone and we can help others. But thank you guys for spearheading this and always doing it so professionally and with courage, frankly, in today's environment. So it's been an honor.
That's very sweet to hear, very rewarding for all of us here at Folks. Sage, wherever you go, you need to know we will all follow you. You have fans and
Thank
friends
you.
at Folks and elsewhere. Wherever you go, you have a base, and don't ever doubt that for a second. And hopefully we'll bring you back on Folks, but we will follow you. We'll keep tabs on you. We want
Thank
you.
you.
We're rooting for you and want you to succeed. All right. Good night from Folks. Until next time, Thane Rosenbaum. Good night,
Thank
Sage.
you.
Thank you.